And this brings me to a woman that I know from upstate named Marguerite, who is not a writer or an academic or philosopher, but I think who once gave me a really good answer to the question of why she reads anyway. She is a dancer and an actress, or she was. She's now runs a children's theater upstate, which is incredibly good, incredibly lively, and she also likes to read a lot. And she was talking to me once about, I think it was Oliver Twist, not to focus on Dickens too much, but it may not have been, it may just have been some older book. And she was saying to me how incredible it was for her that this guy was 100 years ago or whatever, 150 years ago, sitting in a room by himself, writing this thing. Or as she expressed it, bringing this whole world up from his body. His gut, his heart, his brain, out through his arm. Word by word, in his hand, working the pen. And I'm sitting here by myself in this room, reading it. And she's right, that's amazing. Writing is a most mental art form, and apparently a non-physical one. You just sit there and think. But she's right. It took a dancer to understand that. When it's great, it comes from the individual idiosyncratic body. The brain is housed in a body. It has intimate understanding, including the sub-thought, sub-emotional understanding. It's intimate and deep, down to the pools where we all live our most mysterious and strange life, where our personalities, desires, social rules, identities, who we think we are, who we would like to be, are pressed up against the unknowable mystery of the world around us, just what we see right here. This thing, this water in this bottle, how peculiar would be to describe that. The worms underneath the sea eating sulfur, they actually exist. Writing is about words, but strangely, the most powerful writing uses words in such a way that it transcends words to become something much more powerful and more layered, and at the same time more direct. Writing comes into being through the rational mind, but great writing comes from a much stranger place, related to the rational mind, but in a way that dreams are related to thought, poetically and irrationally. I would like to read you something else as an example of, it's ridiculous to use that word, but I just want to read this to you. It's from Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov. It's a section about a character who's really not very important. I've got to give you some layout of the plot. This is narrated by a guy named Kinboat, who may be a nutcase, or a king in exile from an imaginary country, from a country, not imaginary, country called Zembla, where he held sway and got to do wherever he wanted to do. And in this country, he had a wife who he had to have, according to convention, but because he was far more interested in boys, occasionally a girl, but mostly boys, the marriage is never consummated. And the girl doesn't understand because she's just very young and doesn't get what's going on. Her name is Disa. Like I said, not an important character. She never appears in real time. She appears in his mind only in this section, which I'm about to read to you. What had the sentiments he entertained in regard to Disa ever amounted to? Friendly indifference and bleak respect. Not even in the first bloom of their marriage had he felt any tenderness or any excitement. Of pity, of heartache, there could be no question. He had always been, casual and heartless. But the heart of his dreaming self, both before and after the rupture, made extraordinary amends. He dreamed of her more often, and with incomparably more poignancy than his surface life feelings for her warranted. These dreams occurred when he least thought of her, and worries in no way connected with her assumed her image in the subliminal world as a battle or a reform becomes a bird of wonder in a tale for children. These heart-rending dreams transform the drab prose of his feelings for her into strong and strange poetry, subsiding undulations of which would flash and disturb him throughout the day, bringing back the pang and the richness, and then only the pang, and then only its glancing reflection, and then not affecting at all his attitude towards the real Disa. Her image as she entered and re-entered his sleep, rising apprehensively from a distant sofa or going in search of the messenger who, they said, had just passed through the draperies, took into account changes of fashion. But the Disa wearing the dress he had seen on her the Sunday of the glassworks explosion, or last Sunday, or in any other antechamber of time, forever remained exactly as she looked on the day he had first told her that he did not love her. That happened during a hopeless trip to Italy in a lakeside hotel garden. One cloudless evening with the mountains on the far shore swimming in a sunset haze and the lake all peach syrup regularly rippled with pale blue, and the captions of a newspaper spread flat on the foul bottom near the stone bank, perfectly readable through the shallow diaphanous filth. And because, upon hearing him out, she sank down on the lawn in an impossible posture, examining a grass culm and frowning. He had taken his words back at once, but the shock had fatally starred the mirror, and thenceforth in his dreams her image was infected with the memory of that confession, as with some disease, or the secret after effects of a surgical operation too intimate to be mentioned. The gist, rather than the actual plot of the dream, was a constant refutation of his not loving her. His dream love for her exceeded in emotional tone, in spiritual passion and depth, anything he had experienced in his surface existence. This love was like an endless wringing of hands, like a blundering of the soul through an infinite maze of hopelessness and remorse. They were, in a sense, amorous dreams, for they were permeated with tenderness, with a longing to sink his head into her lap and sob away the monstrous past. They brimmed with the awful awareness of her being so young and so helpless. They were purer than his life. What carnal aura there was in them came not from her, but from those with whom he betrayed her. And even so, the sexual scum remained somewhere far above the sunken treasure and was quite unimportant. Well, who could film that? It's, again, I remind you, an unimportant character. It's incidental. And yet it gets to the heart of the story, the theme, which is the delicate quality of some unreachable ideal. One world bleeding through another, the fragile bridge between an imaginary world and what is, and the tension between the two. The true thing hidden in a squalid, mundane reality, revealing that we are all blundering through the maze of our lives, uncomprehending its vastness, or even ourselves, or what we're doing and why we're doing it. I read for a lot of reasons, but a big one is to have that rare truth acknowledged in human language. But back to what I mentioned about the internet and why it's a bigger challenge than film or music or TV. I think that it is because I believe it's changed the way that we think and perceive, especially children. Anybody younger than the age of 20 or 30 probably. I think, and I'm not sure it's all bad, I don't say that, but it's definitely different. How we perceive, how we think, how we feel, how we make connections from one thing to the next, how we experience grief, how we perceive our own emotions, I think has changed. Literally, the way our brain is wired and our heart responds has changed because of this new medium. It's actually changed me even, and I'm 55. I don't remember when I really started paying attention to the internet. Maybe I was 43, probably even a little older. And still, I think it's affected how I perceive, and it's actually made it harder for me to read. Because I have to take time to slow down and sink into that quiet depth of space so that I can absorb through the words and make the connection between these vast worlds that spring out of these little symbols on the page that I'm not clicking to change one thing to the other quickly. It's very quick, very clever. This new way, it's several things at a time. In some ways, maybe better, I don't know. But what I notice about it is it's very given to group-minded abbreviations and shorthand. I take part in it, I like it, but finally it almost seems to me like the language of ghosts. Like those people flitting past really fast. And, you know, buying this and buying that and running to this and running to that and checking their Blackberries probably and minding their children and thinking about their work and talking on their phone and looking at the TV monitors. And who didn't hear the human being speaking to them right there. And there's no place in that for something like what I just read. So, in conclusion, I'd like to talk about a time a few years ago that I went to Rome for the first time and saw a lot of really ancient, really like things people don't do anymore. Art, paintings, huge religious paintings in churches, sculptures, big art in buildings there. Wonderful. And you know, I still felt it. It still spoke my language up through my feet. But the thing that I liked the most, the thing that in a way impressed me the most, was this little church I visited. I don't even remember the name of it. And it was actually 3 churches, one built atop the other. And the first one was a church, a temple of pre-Christian Roman times. And it was built down into the earth. You had to go 3 stories down. It was a temple of, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this right, but it was a Persian deity named Mithra. Or Mithra, I'm not sure which. And it was amazing to go down into this dark place. It was lit, but nonetheless it was dark, very close, like very small hallways, clearly built for much smaller people, cold, damp, smelling of hummus and rock. The tiles, there were mosaics and also tiles on the floor, they were worn away. A very wealthy family, clearly they must have been wealthy, had buried their child or had their child interred there, and there was a sort of a, not an obituary, a memorial to him, talking about how he was their little wanderer, and they knew he had found his home. There was an underground stream also. There was an image of Mithra, which I couldn't get close to because it was roped off. But it was very crude in comparison to the other things there, the newer things, like rock carved shapes, the spigots that had been carved for the water to run through. It was extraordinary. It was so profound to like put my hand on those things. And then there was the medieval church on top, which is also rather rough, and then a Renaissance church built on top of that. And this was more moving to me than like the Parthenon and the Colosseum and the other really powerful, beautiful places I saw, because those places were all about power. And this place was too, but it was different. It was like the power of the human hand to like create this shape for Mithra, to decide this is the deity, this is who I'm feeling that I'm worshiping. This is how I carve it. I am going to carve this rock, this place in the earth. There was a power, but also a vulnerability, as you felt the human hand meeting the raw force of the earth and the rock. And it was just very deep, stirring for me to be there. And I went there because I actually asked the guy behind the counter at the hotel what he considered to be the most spiritual place in Rome, and he first said the catacombs, but I couldn't get there easily, so second was this place.